Oh, friends, are you in for a treat with this episode? I'm interviewing Nick Giannotti, a lead technical recruiter at Slack. How many of you are currently using Slack? I know it has taken the business world by storm and is bringing teams together by helping them communicate efficiently. This was a fun interview because Nick has a varied perspective when it comes to recruiting. We definitely talk about Slack's process and what he's looking for in technical candidates, but Nick also provides perspective for other functional areas and industries because of his over 7 years of experience in the recruiting world. We touch on the obvious resume and interview tips, but we also talk about when cover letters are appropriate and what you need to think about if you're going to get a tech certificate and switch functional areas. My favorite part of this interview is when Nick talks about messaging recruiters. His real-world examples are a lesson in what not to do, and he provides strategies that will actually help you get noticed. As always, if you want to connect with me or need inspirational and educational career management and advancement content, you can follow Ride the Tide Collective on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. But you'll primarily find me on LinkedIn these days. Please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss out on future episodes. And if you didn't know, I also have the video version of this interview on my YouTube channel, which you can also subscribe to. Just search Ride the Tide Collective. I appreciate your support. Welcome, everyone. We are back with another episode from the recruiter's perspective. And today I have Nick Giannotti with Slack, and he's a lead technical recruiter with Slack, which I'm sure a lot of you, especially if you're in tech right now, you are using Slack on a daily basis. So I'm really excited to have him here talking about their process and his tips and tricks. Nick has been in recruiting for quite a long time, so I know he's not coming from a new perspective. He's got a lot of perspective on hiring, both within a company as well as on the agency side. So Nick, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I'm so happy to have you here.
First off, I want to thank you, Julia, for having me on today. I'm really happy to be here. Recently listened to your podcast and I found it really refreshing and interesting. When you asked me to come on, I was flattered. So thank you for inviting me to be featured on here today.
Oh, you're welcome.
Just to tell you a little bit about my background, thank you for the intro. And I started off my career on the agency side, like most recruiters, and worked on more the client-facing side before moving over to a managed service provider, getting more experience on the account management side, and eventually internal recruitment, where I've really grown to know and love. But I'm really grateful for all my experiences. I got different perspectives from different angles, from supporting clients to being the client and working with external agencies. So currently, as you mentioned, I work as a lead technical recruiter at Slack, covering anything from software engineering to machine learning, DevOps, and security engineering. I partner closely with engineering and product leadership to deeply understand their teams and hiring needs while making hiring recommendations, building strategies to hire amazing people for Slack. I think most of our audience members, as you mentioned, are probably familiar with Slack since they're probably using it every day. But for those that aren't, Slack helps teams work from anywhere. So Slack gives you access to real-time conversations with any of your team members across your company, whether that's via real-time messaging or huddles. But they also have features like Slack Connect, where you can reach out to external vendors. So you really can live and breathe in the app. What makes Slack unique as opposed to email is in email, every message is weighted alike. So it's hard to tell what's important and what's not. With Slack, it's very easy to grab a specific someone's attention with a notification in Slack when you need a quick response. Its power is tremendous, and it really can help streamline processes, whether that's a business proposal or a job offer. So it's a really amazing tool.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that introduction, because I think especially with technical recruiting, there's a lot that is involved on the technical recruiting side and a lot of different types of positions. And you actually mentioned quite a few that some other technical recruiters I've had on the podcast haven't mentioned yet. And so I think that that's really good to see the breadth of what technical recruiting can look like, especially as we go into the future. You mentioned machine learning and all of that. That's such a new space that, people are getting into. And I think that's one side of technical recruiting that is really great. Can you go, I know you kind of sped past it really quick, but can you talk a little bit more about some of those roles that you recruit for that aren't necessarily like, oh, that front end engineer type role or computer
Hmm.
engineer? Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So as far as what I specifically cover, it could be recruiting anything from our machine learning engineer, data scientist type roles to data engineering. That data engineering will incorporate some more things like big data platforms and working with data streaming. We also cover security engineering, from
Mhm.
product security to SecOps. So these are, essentially the people that are keeping our company safe from, prospective hackers that may, try to get, different types of information. Um, but yeah, we definitely also do hire a lot of back-end engineers, as well as
Mhm.
some front-end engineers. And those are typically the engineers that are building your applications, and really, really being creative and building those new features. I'm always impressed every day when I see that the new Slack update. They update their app like pretty much every day, and it's always refreshing to see with what they came out with next.
Amazing. Thank you so much for clarifying because I think that's helpful, especially for people listening who want to get into more of the technical side, that there's not just one path. There are a lot of different paths that you can take, and
Absolutely.
to make sure that you're researching those different paths as you go into it. Okay, I want to talk about the Great Resignation because, and it has a lot of different names and terms now. I think people are trying to adjust it to fit whatever their situation is. But I'm going to go with the Great
Mhm.
Resignation. I'd love to know kind of your perspective recruiting now in the middle of it and what that looks like. But I'd also love to know, since you've been in recruiting for a while, what makes this a little bit different than maybe some other times in the past, or what recruiting looked like before the pandemic and before all of this happened?
Sure, that's a wonderful question. I'll stick with the name, The Great Resignation. I can only speak on behalf of myself, but to be honest, at least with my role, it's been business as usual at Slack. I haven't really seen any significant changes in attrition, just normal stuff. At Slack, we're very fortunate that we're given the option to work fully remote, hybrid, or on site, since we can do our work from anywhere. So I think because of that, we've been, really fortunate that we really haven't seen anything like that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I haven't really been too affected in my recruiting cycles. However, I think there are some other industries like retail and logistics that have been more affected. I do have some friends that also work for other companies, and I think the biggest recruiter's nightmare from their perspective has been the lack of a firm company stance on remote policy. For
Mm.
example, one of my friends is working on recruiting the perfect remote candidate from Los Angeles, and then suddenly their company's policy changed to require the candidate to be on site in New York City. In which case, of course, it didn't work for the candidate, so they lost the candidate, which can be a recruiter's nightmare. But it also doesn't create the best candidate experience. And really, at that point, for a recruiter, you're really restarting your cycle. Anyone that was remote that couldn't be in New York at that point, you have to go back to square one. So I really think at the end, the key is communication and transparency on both sides for both the candidate and company on their expectations.
Yeah. This is such an important discussion that you bring up. And I think Slack is doing the right thing. You can work from home and it's okay. And we're going to
Mhm.
set expectations. And we know, we trust you. We
Absolutely.
know that you're going to do it. And I think that that speaks volumes to not having any kind of significant impact. And I know on the technical side, I think those positions have not turned over as much. That's been what I've been hearing. But I think it's bigger than that. I think what you're talking about, the policies that an organization is pulling down, I think that's so important and so good for candidates to look at when they're researching organizations. What is
Absolutely.
the policy today? And how much has that policy changed in the last 2 years? Because I know that's been a huge issue for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I think following, various tech resources, I see that it changes every day for some companies, and then there are other companies that have decided not to make those changes. I think as a prospective candidate, it's definitely important to get the information before you're applying to the role. And if not, you can always ask your recruiter or whoever your first contact is on what that policy looks like for the future.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, you did mention the hiring cycle. So I would love to know at Slack, do you
Sure.
guys have any type of traditional hiring cycle that you go through? Or is it kind of a whenever things come up, that's when we hire? What does that look like for you guys?
So as far as our hiring cycle, essentially to get hired at Slack, um, honestly, it does depend on the role in the business group that you're hiring for, but typically for engineering hiring, we start off with like a standard recruiting screen, really to align that the role is a mutual fit for both the candidate and obviously the role. Typically, that's followed by either a take-home coding test or a live coding challenge.
Mm,
And then, assuming a pass there, they'd follow up with a hiring manager screen to really get a better understanding of their project work and their career goals. And then the last round would be, your final round team interviews done through Zoom, where you have, 4 to 5 people evaluating, your skills through like technical and behavioral interviews. And then pretty much from there, they're going to make a decision on an offer. And obviously at that point, the candidate has a decision to make. I think a question I get a lot in every interview probably is how long does that take? Um, and it is of course variable per the people involved and their availability, the team's availability. But I say generally, usually takes about 3 to 4 weeks, but of course can go faster or slower.
okay. I have a specific question too, and we're going to talk
Sure.
about resumes and interviewing and all of that. But this is really
Sure.
about kind of the screening side of it. So I'm seeing a lot of people doing different certifications, especially on the
Hmm.
technical side. I know Google's been coming out with a lot of different certifications and things like that. What how do you guys view those certifications? Because I see one side, like the marketing side of that is, oh, get this certification and you'll get a job
Hmm.
immediately. But the career coach in me is like, that's not really how that works. Like you can get the certification, but you still need to have a certain level of experience to really get into,
Right.
especially some of the higher paying tech positions. So can you explain, like, from your perspective, what are you guys looking for? How much of that is true?
Yeah, that's a great question. It reminds me of an advertisement I see when I'm driving for this IT university, talking about like what you can get as a full-time salary as like an operations engineer right out of college. Um, so I always kind of question that when I see that because I'm like, well, this person may not have an experience, may not have done an internship, so it's kind of difficult to kind of put that out there. But as far as certifications go, I think they're like anything where further education in anything is always a positive. It doesn't, of course, guarantee you a job, but it's definitely becoming more common in the industry. Like you mentioned, Google does offer some certifications. You also can get things like an AWS certification. And a lot of the times this can help, pad or add to a resume, especially for those that may not have experience. It could potentially help them get an entry level job. It just, of course, doesn't, obviously guarantee it. My typical recommendation for like the entry level candidates would be, in addition to doing certifications like that, if you're, pursuing a bachelor's or associate's degree, to try to get an internship to, get a better understanding of what you want to do. Don't just do one. I typically would say do two because you might love one of them and you might hate the other. So this way, it kind of gives you a better understanding of what you really want.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you so much for sharing that because I know
No
that
problem.
that's a question that a lot of people have and I want to make sure that the right information is out there from the
Sure.
recruiting side and not just from the people who are trying to sell you the program. So, I
Yeah.
appreciate
Yeah,
that
for sure.
perspective. Okay, let's talk about resumes because I feel like that is one of the top
Sure.
questions that I know I get as a career coach. I'm sure you get as well as a recruiter. What are like your top resume tips for candidates and things that you want to see and maybe things you don't want to see on the resume?
Love this question. My first tip is do not be afraid to ask for help. Sometimes people want to do this all on their own, and I commend them, but there's absolutely no shame in asking a friend, a family member, or even a paid professional to review your resume. For me personally, my go-to person has always been my brother because I know he'll be 100% honest with me and he won't sugarcoat anything. But when you ask people to review your resume, they may all say something different. So you should take that input into consideration and really make a decision on whether you want to add that input to your resume or leave it as is. My second tip would be to quantify your experience and really add value. Think, why would someone want to hire me? Am I someone that can save a company time and money? So I'll give you an example. Stay with me here on the math, but if I completed a 6-month project in just 3 months and I make $100 per hour and work 40 hours a week, I just saved the company almost $50,000 because I saved the company 3 months of time. So I don't know about you, but who wouldn't want to save time and money? My
Yes.
last resume tip is people often forget that a resume is a living document. It should be updated constantly and can almost always be improved. I would aim to update your resume, once a quarter, even if it's just minor tweaks. You never know if your situation will change.
Mhm.
You always want to be ready for when you find the perfect opportunity or the perfect opportunity finds you.
Yes. Okay, Nick, I love all of these suggestions. This is so great. One of the things that I tell people all the time is have that master resume. Have like a Google Doc that you can easily access that has every position, that has every win quantified, all of that in there. It makes the tailoring process so much easier
Absolutely.
because you likely have written something already for something else that you've applied for that you can just copy and paste into a new document for wherever you're applying to. So I love that tip. Also, I don't think that you need to pay for resume services. I don't do resume writing unless you're already a client that I do other work, other career work with. And the reason is because honestly, it's you need like a couple people to look over it, primarily for grammatical errors. But most of this content, like what we're talking about, a lot of it is out there already in terms of how to write your content. I know I have a freebie on how to write content because I'm
So
like,
much free information. Yeah.
yeah, there's so much free information out there. I mean, if you want to hire somebody to write it, that's fine. But I will tell you, as somebody who used to work in higher education, I can tell when somebody has had their resume professionally written versus somebody who has done it themselves because there's a look and there's a sound that professional resume writers have that all kind of sounds the same. And it's not to knock it. I know some people need that. They don't have the
Hmm.
time and whatever. That's fine, but make sure whoever you're working with is really working with you as an individual and tailoring to you,
Absolutely.
and it's not just generic because we can tell if it's generic. I don't know
I
if you
couldn't agree.
can, but I know I can.
I couldn't agree more because, if someone else is writing your resume and they're not working with you, they could be putting skills on there that you may not be as strong on. So when it comes down to the interview, if you're not able to speak with that, it's not going to necessarily be a positive thing. So I
Yeah.
definitely think if you are working with somebody, make sure that you're able to really give them some highlights of what your experience is, so this way they can make it as good as possible. But at the end of the day, your input definitely needs to be there.
Yes, yes. Okay, you mentioned interviews. Let's talk about interviews. What are some of
Sure.
your tips on the interview side? Especially now, pretty much everything is done online, which looks a little bit different than when we used to do interviews in person. So,
Very true.
what are you looking for? What are some of your tips there?
Sure. So in general, I'm looking to understand, if the candidate is a good fit for the job and interested in the role. Does the role align to their career goals? Another important signal, especially for like experienced candidates, is progressive experience and acquisition of new skills. We look for people who are capable of acquiring new skills since technology is always evolving. It's important that, we keep up with these changes and adapt. For the less experienced candidates, since they don't necessarily have as much experience to go off of, they really need to demonstrate strong potential. So that's, high motivation, ability to solve technical problems and acquire those new skills. There's a lot of coding platforms out there from, HackerRank to CoderPad to LeetCode that enable engineers to really practice their problem solving and coding skills. So I definitely encourage any, of our technical folks to, try out samples on that. I also, make sure you do your research on the company. Take your time to read about Slack and think about why it would be interesting for you to join us. It would also be a good idea to meditate on any of your recent experience or project work, um, as we're going to ask, a number of questions on, the systems, teams, and projects you've been a part of. So, practicing, coding skills and problem solving is always good when you're preparing for technical interviews. Every interview, though, is not necessarily going to be a technical interview, as you'll also have behavioral interviews. So, when you're doing behavioral interviews, I'd incorporate the STAR method in your answer. I actually was previously certified in this interview type. And I noticed that in behavioral interviews, the question always sounds like really easy. And a lot of people, because of that, will rush straight into their answers and come in unprepared. So I would think about some examples that you'd like to share a few nights before and really practice it, whether that's with a family or member or friend. And the practice doesn't make it perfect, but it sure makes it better. And at the end of the day, it's perfectly acceptable to tell your interviewer, hey, I just need a couple seconds to collect my thoughts and just write down a basic structure of the STAR method before you deliver it. Just don't take the entire interview to do so, of course. um, if you don't have a family member or friend, record yourself on a video. Everybody has probably a smartphone nowadays or a computer, so you can practice in the mirror or record yourself. It's really important for you to do this for your own confidence, so that when you're delivering your answers, that it comes off very strongly.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I love all of those tips. Just practicing alone. I feel like, especially
Absolutely.
with video, you have to kind of understand, like, how are you framed up? What's behind you? What does it look like? How's the lighting? I think if you look at both of us right now, you have a lighting source on the side, but it's not washing you out. I've got different lights set. those those things matter in terms of how people are viewing you, and as much as what is coming out of your mouth as well. And so, yeah, just being comfortable. And all of us have been on video now, most of us, at least for the last couple of years. And so just being able to be just that much more comfortable and practice is so key. And because it's on the computer, I would have notes up. Like, there's an advantage that we have now with video that you don't necessarily get in person. It's harder in person because it's harder to
Hmm.
have your own personal notes. Like, so if you have a
Right.
couple of stories, make like a quick little notepad on your screen just to trigger yourself so that you remember those stories.
Love
And I
that tip.
think I don't know. For me, sometimes I get so nervous that my mind goes blank and I forget all of
Hmm.
the great things I've done, even if I've prepared. And so just having that note there, I think, is really good to just trigger you um, to some of those experiences.
Absolutely. To piggyback off that idea, I also like that idea for, asking questions, to have those questions written down beforehand, because oftentimes at the end of the interviewer, you might be drained from all the questions you answered. You might not think of the questions you want to answer. So if you have them, written down or typed up beforehand, this way it's a reminder to you, hey, I should, ask these questions. You don't necessarily have to ask all of them, but it helps really show your interest and get you to learn a little bit more about the job.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay, I have a controversial question. It's been controversial in my interviews. Do we care about cover letters? Like, what's our stance on cover letters these days?
Yeah, I love this question. I do think it does matter, per the industry. I can only speak on my personal experience, but for tech roles, I don't particularly care about them too much, because I recruit from mid to senior level individual contributor roles. So at this level, they're experienced professionals, and their resume typically speaks for itself. However, for like senior leadership or people leadership type roles, it may be more expected since it may test written communication and presentation skills. However, there was a time that I actually worked on some legal positions at a startup, and it was much more relevant then since the legal positions would be communicating and presenting with executive stakeholders. So
Mm,
finding several typos in a cover letter, for example, could indicate, a lack of preparation or professionalism. So I think it's really important always to proofread, and of course tailor your cover letter to your audience. Whether that's the hiring manager, a recruiter, or an executive level official, you probably want to change your language a little bit to cater to the audience. Lastly, I think at the internship level, cover letters can actually be relevant because there's so many applicants that typically get put in for these types of roles since the qualifications are relatively low. And because of the sheer amount of competition, it could be helpful to split hairs between applicants. So I think
mhm.
those are typically the most times I've seen cover letters be relevant.
I love that. I love that perspective. And it's been really consistent, honestly, with some of the other technical recruiters. Basically, if you're
Hmm.
in a technical role, it's like, it's not really needed, which I think is great. I think it's great for that
Sure.
population. But I think you're spot on with positions that require a lot more soft skills and,
Hmm.
possibly even writing as well. I think that cover letter can really help. I've also heard too, people who are transitioning careers, sometimes that cover letter can help talk about why you're making that transition. And I love for the internships, I actually
Context,
had
yeah.
not really thought about that. I know I used to work with interns back in the day, and it was really hit or miss with cover letters. And if they required it, I always told them to do it, but they hated it. And I was like, look, this is your chance to show your passion for the company because
Absolutely.
you don't have the experience. So you need to be able to tell the story of why this position matters to you. And then I think it also makes them think about why they even want the position, which I think is really helpful.
I totally agree with that, and I definitely think for the job transitioners or career changers, that gives them a floor really to you know present their case of why their experience is translatable. So totally agree on that. Um, and I think one other thing maybe on the resume and cover letter combination, some technical candidates may share like their GitHub or LinkedIn profile or projects they've worked on.
Mm.
So those I think can be a boost in terms of like sharing your experience.
Great. I love that. Okay, I'd love to get your perspective on, and there might not be a difference, but I know you were on the agency side for a while at a
Hmm.
certain point in your career. Do you feel like the hiring process is it different between an agency and corporate? Because I feel like sometimes people go to an agency and don't really understand what that means. And I'd love
Hmm.
to know kind of what are your thoughts there? Have you seen a difference, or is there any advice that you can give to candidates who maybe are going to an agency of like what they need to think about when they go there?
Yeah, I love this question. So I think in general, if I think about like the holistic interview process, more often than not, if you're going directly to corporate or internal, the process will probably be a little bit shorter because you're not necessarily having that agency as the extra layer. However, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't use agencies. Agencies can really sometimes help facilitate that first conversation. If you're working with an agency that has great relationships with a hiring manager, they may get you an opportunity that you may not have been able to get on your own. So I think being selective with who you work with, you should be essentially interviewing anyone that you're going to be working with just as they're interviewing you. Um, so I think just in general, you know, it really depends on the person on whether they should use it or not. I would just make sure that they're reputable. Look them up
Mhm.
online. See what kind of clients do they work with. Are you a financial professional and they only work with tech professionals? Maybe that's not the right fit. But if you go to their website and most of their work is accounting and finance, maybe that could be a good fit. So agencies are specialized just like you know candidates or companies can be. So I'd make sure you work with the right one.
Good. Okay. Awesome. I think that's super helpful for people to think about when they're trying to go between the two. Cause I know I've had clients that are like, oh, I don't want to go through an agency. And I'm like, if there's an opportunity that's going to get you some experience, that
Hmm.
could be the best in for you. if you're not having luck going straight to a company. So I want to make sure that people aren't like, just throwing them out. But you're absolutely right. There's definitely a legitimacy factor there. Make
Absolutely.
sure that, they are reputable. You should never pay for it, things like that.
Hmm.
You want to make sure that
Right.
they're going to work for you.
Absolutely. And there are even some cases where you may not even have the choice to work with the agency. In the case of
Hmm.
like an RPO that completely runs, an internal process, you're going to be working with them anyways, since the RPO may have like the rights to that, contract or job. So just something to be aware of when you're applying.
Yeah, great. And some companies can't afford to have in-house recruiting,
That's also
depending on
very true.
how their company is structured and, what their like income flow is, they might have to hire out because that's just the nature of their business. And so that's some of understanding the companies that you're applying for as well.
Yeah, totally agree.
Okay. What is something that you think job seekers should be doing but aren't doing right now?
Yeah, so love the question. I think really networking and networking strategically is something that job seekers should be doing, whether that's, connecting on LinkedIn, going to network events, whether that's virtual or in person with like a meetup.com. Meetup.com, if for those who aren't aware of it, they have different types of groups that you can meet up with. It could be, job seekers, it could be even sports or gaming related. They have personal stuff as well. But it's a really great opportunity to meet people that you may not necessarily have the opportunity to meet, in person or virtually. Um, I also, when networking, I would really try your best to send tailored messages rather than like
Mhm.
generic or templated messages. Last week I actually got an email asking a candidate to consider them for Amazon, and I was like, I don't know if you reached out to the right person. I work for Slack. Um, Sometimes I also get like cold emails with just a resume attached with no subject line, no
Mhm.
body, no indication of what role they're interested in. So it's not my tech recommendation to do that. You really want to use this as an opportunity to make yourself stand out.
Right.
One cold email I was actually really impressed with was I got a message from a candidate, never met him before. He had built an app that made his resume, cover letter, and GitHub into a Slack workspace with kind of putting them into each a separate channel. And I thought it was really clever, creative, and refreshing. And I knew at that point I had to interview him. So it's really an opportunity to get yourself that foot in the door.
Oh, I love that. I love it when people get really creative like that. I think that it's valued more than people realize,
Hmm.
you know?
Yeah, for sure.
And I think some job seekers get so burnt out that, they end up sending things that, that I think when they don't send the right company and all of that, that to me is a sign of somebody that's probably been just like repetitively sending messages. But I can
Right.
tell you, I actually would love to know your thoughts on this as well, maybe personally as well as professionally. I see a lot of people, especially on LinkedIn, that are like, oh, I've applied to 100 jobs, 200 jobs. I mean, these are people applying to hundreds of jobs. And they see it as this like amazing thing that they've done. And for me, as a career coach, I see that and I'm like, oh, okay, so you are not targeted with what what you're looking for and what you want, because my strategy is always less is more. Like really to hone
Hmm.
in on a couple of companies, do that research, connect with people, connect with recruiters and really work that side of it versus throwing applications out to like hundreds of different companies and positions. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I mean, I've been on both sides of that. So, as a candidate, as well as obviously receiving the candidates that do serial apply, as I call it. Um, I think in general, it's not necessarily the best strategy because from a bandwidth perspective, if they're putting out 200 applications, best case scenario, they get 200 interviews. They're not really going to be able to take those. That's first of all, it's
Right.
not going to happen. But but I definitely think the more tailored approach is definitely stronger because having some of that information about the company, why you'd want to work with them, what's interesting about the company to you, and really allowing yourself to dedicate more time to it, I think is typically the better strategy.
Hmm.
For example, if you were looking for, advertising technology companies, there may be a select few that you may be interested in. So I think that may be the better strategy than blasting 200 messages. Half of them are in ad tech companies,
Right.
and you might just decline it anyway. So it may not necessarily be worth your time. I definitely think in a job search, your time is limited, right? You're working full time potentially. You might be an entrepreneur who has a side hustle. So you want to make sure that when you are putting out those applications, that you are obviously interested in potentially a good match for the role. Um, but I wouldn't necessarily stop after the application. Fall back to that networking piece. You could probably find on the LinkedIn posting who is the recruiter. Sometimes it might be listed. Other times you may have to do a little bit of digging, going through like their company and people page, especially for the smaller companies. There might only be one technical recruiter, so it might be a little
Right.
bit easier to send that email.
Yeah. Okay. I totally skipped over our ATS question, which I think goes in
Sure.
line with this as well. What type of system are you using? Do you guys use ATS, and how do you utilize that? Because I think from the candidate side, there's a lot of like, oh, I just apply into this system and nothing happens,
Hmm.
and I don't like doing that. And there's a lot of hate on the ATS systems, but I know for you
Sure.
guys, it's a big tool that most companies are using. So, do you have any like
Hmm.
thoughts of how you guys are using it, if you even are?
Yeah, so I've used anything from Greenhouse to Workday, our ATS, as well as like our outbound Boolean searches when we're looking for candidates, as well as LinkedIn recruiter searches. Essentially, you're looking for relevant keywords and skills that match the job description. So, I mean, I think of an ATS as a tool to help really find the right candidate to be able to filter through all the applications. For some software engineering jobs, for example, they might require experience that may say like public cloud experience. So you might see that on his resume as Amazon Web Services or AWS
Mm,
for short. It might be listed as Google Cloud Platform, or GCP. So I think making sure that you have those types of keywords in your resume,
mm,
assuming you have the experience, could be relevant for you getting the interview. Sometimes I've gotten applications or seen someone's LinkedIn profile that just has like a title and the company they're working for, and it's kind of tough to evaluate if they're a good fit if they're not providing like their data and metrics and experience,
mm,
um, the systems they've been working with. So definitely on the technical front and really any position. It's always good to have that up to date because I can tell you for a fact that going through the Slack interview process, not only am I going to be looking for your LinkedIn profile, but so are the hiring managers and
mm.
other team members. So it's always good to have that filled out.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm pretty sure every recruiter I've interviewed has said the same thing. I feel like that needs to be like the blinking sign for this podcast season. Fill out your LinkedIn profile, put your metrics, put your projects, put the software that you use, like put all
Right.
of that in your profile. Oh, that, and it seems so simple, but I mean, when I get requests, connection requests, I always go to the profile, and the amount of people that do not completely fill out a profile still boggles my mind because I'm like, I don't know how to help you. I can make an assumption, but I don't know what you do if you don't fill out at least some of the information. So I thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. Totally agree. I think the skills section is more important than people think of because like sometimes people might get like they might have like Microsoft Office or something like that on their resume, but like maybe something that may be more relevant to their skills, like for a database engineer, maybe MySQL could be relevant,
Right.
but having those skills will help recruiters find you. So, you're doing yourself a favor by filling that out.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Okay. I hope everybody's hearing that because I know this has been a theme. Help the recruiter help you. Like, I feel
Exactly.
like it's to the job seeker's detriment at this point if they're not taking advantage of what is out there. And LinkedIn is free. It is a free tool that people are using to try to find you. So it's like utilize the whole thing and make it work for you. So, love that.
Absolutely.
All right. Any last thoughts or tips for job seekers out there?
Absolutely. So, um, from a source perspective, I would stay diversified in your sources when you're looking for jobs. Um, I wouldn't only apply to jobs on just LinkedIn or just Dice.com because then you're limiting yourself to other sites from like Indeed to Built-in, USAJobs.gov. As mentioned earlier, don't forget to network. Um, Over 40% of hires are referrals. So referrals can be a great way to get your resume in front of the right person. Thank you notes are really key. They go a long way to really show your appreciation, but they also really give you a great opportunity to reinforce why you may be a good fit for the role, and of course, show your interest. So I don't see that utilized probably as much as it used to be, and I think in the last like 5 years, I've definitely seen less. So definitely use thank you notes as best you can. Um, and of course, stay positive. Job search is hard and it can be a long process. It can take an average 6 months to land the right opportunity or more.
Yes.
Statistics say you may not land your first job you applied to, so you need to keep trying. It's perfectly fine if you don't land that first interview. Shake it off, learn from it, adapt, and keep trying. And lastly, you want to be able to stay organized. Create a tracker of where you're applying to. So when the recruiter calls, you know exactly who they are and what job they're calling about. This allows you to know where you need to follow up later on in the process as you advance through other stages. And lastly, the actual lastly, have a confidence in yourself. And if you believe in yourself, anything's possible. So definitely, make sure you practice and you'll get there.
Yes. Oh my gosh, Nick. So inspirational and encouraging for job seekers out there. I love the note, the thank you note, the thank you email. I know I tell clients that all the time, like send a thank you note. And the pushback that I get from it is insane. I don't know. I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to do that. Is that too pushy? And I'm like, it's not going to hurt you. Like if it's a well thought out email, like it's not going to hurt you at all unless they explicitly say not to do any type of
Right.
follow up. If it says that, then don't do that. But if it doesn't, like definitely do that, especially if you loved the interview process and you got good information from it as well and you're even more excited, then definitely email with a thank you note or message on LinkedIn. I love that you said that because it really is a lost art and I think people do appreciate it. So that's great.
My
Nick,
pleasure.
thank you so much. This was such a wealth of information, and I know that my listeners are really going to find value in everything that you've shared today, especially the encouragement. I think that goes a long way, especially right now as people are in the middle of it and applying and all of that. Where can people connect with you best to either learn more about Slack or just learn more about you and the positions that you have open?
Yeah, so I mean, LinkedIn would probably be the best place. I also post, my job postings I'm managing as well on my Twitter page.
Okay, awesome. And I will put links to all of that in the blog post for this episode so that you can connect with Nick. And here's another tip on the LinkedIn side. If you connect with Nick or if you message him, let him know that you learned about him from my podcast because not only do I tend to end up hearing about that, but it also is a different connection point and it adds kind of that personal side where he now knows that you have done a little bit of research already and you know who he is. So I hope that's okay to say. I think that helps in the
Yeah,
LinkedIn
that sounds good.
process to set you apart a little bit. So, Nick, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate you giving your time today.
Thank you again as well. I really appreciate you, going with this podcast series, really show the perspective of a recruiter. Because, as you know, sometimes recruiters don't necessarily get the best rep, and I think just being able to understand both sides is always a good thing.
Yes, I definitely want to show that there are people on the other side of receiving the applications and humanize this process a little bit more, because you're right. I think they are getting a little bit of a bad rap right now. And so I hope that this helps clear up some things for people that maybe they didn't understand about the process. So, yeah, thank you again.